What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Today I want to take a look at the schedule of the third wave Black Murdersrow. Take a look at their fight schedule, the opponents they were in there with, the fighters that were in their era, champions that avoided them, how many fights they had per month, what fighters they defeated. That would give us a better perspective, a better idea as to what really took place during that time. Now, we took a look at the first wave of Black Murdersrow, and we took a look at the second wave of Black Murdersrow. But I want to dive a little deeper into the third wave of Black Murdersrow, find out exactly what really took place. Why were they prevented from getting a title shot, which was criminal, in my opinion. But in the first wave of Black Murdersrow, we're looking at Harry Wills. Now, he was not the original member. The original member in the heavyweight division was Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette, Sam McVeigh, and Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson moved out of the Black Murdersrow, 1908. When he would knock out Noah Brusso of Canada. You know him as Tommy Burns. He was 5'7", and he would have several title defenses with Tommy Burns. So Jack Johnson would campaign to face Tommy Burns, followed him all over the states. And he'd eventually get an opportunity. He'd face Sam Langford. He'd face Joe Jeanette 10 times. Be in the ring with Sam McVeigh, many of them. So he was well deserving of a title shot. He would get one in Sydney, Australia. And he would handle Tommy Burns like a child. He would decide to wrap this fight up in 14 rounds. And the sheriffs would stop the camera as Tommy Burns would be falling towards the canvas. So now that Jack Johnson was out of the first wave of Black Murdersrow, there was an available slot because it was originally 4. And in comes Harry Wills. Now, you had smaller men that were part of the Black Murdersrow as well. Men like Dave Holly, Jack Blackburn, Bobby Dobbs, Harry Cook. You have Fast Black and many of them. But the most popular ones would be the men that I mentioned. And Harry Wills would step in. He would take on Sam Langford 22 times. And he would have 17 major fights. Would defend his title 37 times. Jack Johnson had 17 colored championship fights. Sam Langford would have over 40. He would have 63 colored championship fights. And over 40 colored title defenses. And you mean to tell me these men were not worthy of a title shot? for the established title. But what's so convincing about the shutout of Harry Wills was that Jack Dempsey had signed the contract in 1924. He totally ignored Harry Wills. Now, Tex Rickard would take the first blame for that when he stated that he did not want to have that fight because he didn't want the backlash that happened in 1910 when Jack Dempsey would defeat the Boilermaker, Jim Jeffries. He beat Jim Jeffries half to death, handled him like a child. Now, yes, the Boilermaker, Jim Jeffries, had retired in 1905. He was out for 4 years. And he would receive a title shot in 1910. So he's technically out 5 years. He had to shed 100 pounds. Had nothing to do with Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson never asked him to come back. He asked for several title opportunities when Jim Jeffries was champion. Jim Jeffries had drew the color line. Sam Langford knocked on the door for a shot with Jim Jeffries, and Jim Jeffries drew the color line. So Jack Johnson was kind enough to give Jim Jeffries, who personally, in my opinion, didn't deserve the shot, an opportunity. And he carried him for basically 15 rounds. Had it not been for the heckling of Jim Corbett, calling Jack Johnson every N-word you can think of. And here's an American patriot using that kind of language, showed who he really was. Wasn't for him, Jeffries would have made it for 15 rounds complete. Because of that disrespect is why Jack Johnson decided to get Jeffries on out of there. Because of that reason, there were riots all over the country. Houses being burned in the black community. Little boys being beaten mercifully. Men being hung all around this country. But that's the reason why Tex Rickard stated he didn't want to promote that fight. That was his reason. Fight was supposed to take place in Jersey City, New Jersey. Boyles, 30 acres. But because Jack Dempsey reneged on that contract, totally avoided it, Jack Dempsey was no longer allowed to fight in the state of New York. He was banned from boxing in the state of New York. All because he didn't want to honor a contract. That is the most sacred thing between two men. Shake hands. But he signed a contract. He refused to fight Harry Wills. Harry Wills would eventually face Jack Sharkey, the Boston Gob. And Harry Wills was disqualified in 1926. It was stated excessive holding. It was stated a low blow. Whatever the case, his colored heavyweight championship title was stripped from him. Now that is not blackballed. I don't know what is. No pun intended. So Harry Wills' title is now vacant. And the next man to stake claim to that title would be the Leaperville Shadow, George Godfrey. George Godfrey would take on Larry Gans of Canada. And he would defeat Larry Gans. And he would now officially become the new colored heavyweight champion. Now he would take on fighters such as Obie Walker and Al Walker. Obie Walker would be in the ring with Elmer Violent Ray 14 times. That was typical of how the Black Murdersrow was handled. But then in the 1920s, you would have the second wave of Black Murdersrow. Panama Joe Gans. Joey Hicks was Allentown Joe Gans. Leaperville Shadow, George Godfrey. Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt. The Pride of Harlem, Jack McVeigh. Nobby Joe Gans. We would have Leo Patterson and Leo Johnson. We'd also have a fighter by the name of Len Johnson. Let me just talk about him real quickly, and then we'll go into the careers of the third wave of Black Murdersrow. Now, Len Johnson, he was known as the English Flash. Leonard Becker Johnson. He was born October 22nd, 1902 in Manchester, United Kingdom. He died at the age of 71, September 28, 1974, in Manchester, United Kingdom. He was a middleweight, just stood 6 foot 1 inch and had a 74.5-inch reach. He was managed by John Bull. He fought from 1920 to 1933. Had total bout career of 135 fights, 95 wins, 36 knockouts, 33 losses, and 7 draws. Now, Len Johnson would take on Jack Payne. They called him Tiger Jack Payne. Saturday, April 17, 1920, Alabama Theater. And the thing about this fight, you can get tickets for this fight. The black community couldn't go see the fight. Tuesday, October 26, 1920. Scored a 10-round decision. Up until the last 3 seconds. Referee would stop the fight. Against a fighter by the name of Young Marshall. It was at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, England. Between January 1st, 1921 and February 1st, 1921. Johnson went on to win 2 fights. Jerry Cogan, 3rd round knockout, and Harry Johnson, 2nd round knockout. Johnson would then lose Tuesday, June 14th, 1921, against Jack Royal, St. George Hall. But after several victories, 1921, Len Johnson had his first real opportunity in 1925 when he faced a non-title bout with world champion Roland Todd. British middleweight Len Johnson defeated twice. Len Johnson ran into the rule. This was a rule created for fighters that didn't have a seat at the table. And what I mean by that, you didn't have a white mother or a white father. If you had a black mother, white father, or black father, white mother, you couldn't fight for the title. Now, in the United States, that was not a law, just a rule that was established by John O'Sullivan and others. But in the United Kingdom, it was an actual law. It was called Rule 24. There was nothing that Lynn Johnson could do about it. And if a fighter was not a child of a set of white parents, he was not eligible to fight for the world title. Champion of Commonwealth Middleweight Empire recognition of Australia is where he had to go. 1904, Leonard's dad took him to a boxing booth. Then Harvey, Ted Kid Lewis, Roland Todd, Tiger Jack Payne, Billy Gypsy Daniels, Joe Bloomfield, Marcel Thiel, Jack Walker. These were the men that was placed before him. Lynn Johnson traveled to Australia, and he wins the British Empire Middleweight Championship crown. He defeated Harry Collins. World Middleweight Champion, Irish Bulldog Mickey Walker, refused to face Lynn Johnson because he himself had drawn a color line. Now, you can blame his manager, but Mickey Walker accepted that agreement. And Mickey Walker's camp told Lynn Johnson, if you take on Tommy Milligan and you defeat him, I'll give you a shot. Mickey Walker knew that Lynn Johnson could not fight Tommy Milligan because Lynn Johnson would never get a title shot. So Tommy Milligan of Scotland would get a shot with Mickey Walker. Mickey Walker would knock out Tommy Milligan. And Lynn Johnson had to go to Australia to win the British Commonwealth Empire Middleweight Championship belt in a different country that belonged to the country that he was from. Here you have another man that's not from that country. He's from Scotland, and he got a title shot. As a representative of the country that Lynn Johnson was from, you tell me he wasn't blackballed, no pun intended. And eventually, and by the way, Lynn Johnson defeated Roland Todd, defeated Ted Kid Lewis. All these men would become champion. But he was not given a title shot. You had three men that was in the top five. And Mickey Walker was a middleweight champion. Tell you how ironic this is. William Gorilla Jones, the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith, and Lynn Johnson. Those are the three. Harry Smith died in 1933. Lynn Johnson retired in 1933. Man you had left was William Gorilla Jones. Mickey Walker had retired from the middleweight division and moved up because he had no choice. There were only three men left in that division that was in the top five, and they were all black fighters. And since he refused to fight him, he refused to be stripped, he decided to vacate his title and move up to the light heavyweight division. Now, yes, there was money in it. Yes, he wanted to fight for the heavyweight championship title, but he had unfinished business. And he refused to fight these men. And that is unfortunate because these men never got the opportunities that they so rightly deserved. So William Gorilla Jones would eventually face Ardon Piazza. He would win. And he would be robbed with Marcel Theo. Now we move on to the third wave of Black Murdersrow. Now I'm putting up various pictures of members that were in the Black Murdersrow. Both these men you see here was in the third wave of Black Murdersrow. Now to your left is young Peter Jackson. He was from the Pacific Coast. He would reside in Los Angeles, California. He was a Pacific Coast lightweight champion. He would take on Coco Kid, Herbert Lewis Harwood. And they would fight for the vacant colored welterweight championship crown. 1936, July 26 to be exact. And Coco Kid would stop Peter Jackson in 2 rounds. And the interesting thing about Coco Kid, that he would be the first colored welterweight champion and the last colored middleweight champion. He would pick up the welterweight championship crown in 1936. And he would pick up the colored middleweight championship crown from the man who is on your right, and that's Holman Williams. He would defeat him in 1943. And he would be the last member of the Black Murdersrow who would have a title. And Coco Kid, in my opinion, is the third greatest Black Murdersrow fighter. I have Holman Williams number 1 and Charlie Burley number 2. Have Coco Kid number 3. Now, Coco Kid and Holman Williams fought from featherweight to middleweight. Charlie Burley did not. He fought from welterweight to middleweight as a professional. Holman Williams was in a ring with Tommy Paul. Tommy Paul would become a champion. And Holman Williams and Coco Kid would get it on 14 times. Coco Kid would defeat Holman Williams 9 times. August 18th, 1936. Joe Louis would knock out Jack Sharkey in 2 rounds of New York's Yankee Stadium. Why was that important? Because June 19th, 1936, Joe Louis would be stopped in 12 rounds in the same New York's Yankee Stadium by Max Schmeling. And at that time, Joe Louis was a symbol to the Black community that things will be all right. There's opportunity here. They had someone that they could look up to. Because when Jack Johnson was fighting, he fought for himself. Now, there was examples as to what opportunities you can have if you just go out and do it. But there was also repercussions. Many men were hung who tried that. You couldn't look at a white woman during those days. It was just the way the time was. And I'm trying to put everything in perspective so you can see what opportunities were not there for first, second, and even third wave of Black Murdersrow. January 8th, 1937, Holman Williams would defeat Tony Falco in Philadelphia in 10 rounds. September 25th, 1937, Jersey Joe Walcott knocked out Elmer Violent Ray in 3 rounds. March 12th, 1937, Holman Williams defeats Coco Kid in 10 rounds in New Orleans. March 25th, 1937, Obie Walker would defeat Elmer Violent Ray 6 times. I'm sorry, in the 6th round. They fought each other 14 times. But he would defeat him in 6 rounds. March 25th, 1937. June 22nd, 1937, Joe Louis knocks out Jimmy Braddock in 8 rounds in Chicago. They fought in Comiskey Park. And this would give hope to members in the black community. Now, Joe Louis was not satisfied because the year previous, 1936, he'd be stopped by Max Schmeling in Yankee Stadium. And he did not allow Jimmy Cannon, any sports writers, to call him champion until he would defeat Max Schmeling in the rematch. He could care less about the title. It was his integrity and his honor that he most cared about. October 29th, 1937, Henry Armstrong would knock out Peter Cerrone in 6 rounds, New York's Madison Square Garden. Why was this important? Because Henry Armstrong would become the 3rd black fighter to fight in New York's Madison Square Garden and win a title. 1926, Theodore Tiger Flowers would defeat Harry Greb, becoming the first black middleweight champion. 1935, John Henry Lewis would defeat Bob Olin, and he would become the 2nd black light heavyweight champion, but he would become the first black American light heavyweight champion. Balansiki was not from America. And then Henry Armstrong would defeat Peter Cerrone in 1937 in Madison Square Garden. And he would be the first American black fighter to win that title. Kid Chocolate was from Cuba. George Dixon was from Canada. December 17th, 1937, Lloyd Marshall would defeat Johnny Bennett Romero, 10 rounds. April 27th, 1938, Elmer Violent Ray would defeat Obie Walker in the heavyweight contest. It was for the colored heavyweight championship title. May 10th, 1938, Jersey Joe Walcott lost 10 rounds to Tiger Jack Fox, Camden, New Jersey. Tiger Jack Fox would take on Milo Patina for the vacant light heavyweight championship crown. Where did that vacant title come from? John Henry Lewis was stripped of his title because he didn't defend it against Tiger Jack Fox. And why he didn't do so was because he didn't pass an eye examination test. And the fight doctor had made a recommendation to the commissioner that John Henry Lewis do not fight Tiger Jack Fox. And because that happened, he was stripped. Now, that was a portion. You had the NBA, and you also had the New York SAC. So he had one of them, and he would defend it against Al Gaynor, and then he would relinquish that title in 1939 of January when he would take on Joe Louis for the heavyweight championship title, and he would retire from boxing, and he would open up businesses and have real estate in Harlem when he retired. May 31st, 1938, Henry Armstrong would defeat Barney Ross, 15 rounds, at the New York Madison Square Garden Bowl. Why was this important? Because Henry Armstrong would become the 4th black welterweight champion. in boxing history. 1902, you had the Barbados Demon Joe Walcott. 1904, Dixie Kid. Then you would have Young Jack Thompson when he would defeat Jackie Fields. Then Henry Armstrong defeating Barney Ross. So now you had one more mission for Henry Armstrong. He would take on Lou Ambers, and he would become the lightweight champion in New York's Madison Square Garden and hold all three titles, the lightweight, welterweight, and featherweight championship crown simultaneously. So in 1938, black fighters had every division sewed up but the middleweight. Joe Louis had the heavyweight championship title. John Henry Lewis had the light heavyweight championship crown. Henry Armstrong had the featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight championship title. And this was great news for the African American community because they now had their morals uplifted. They felt that there were opportunities. They had someone in each weight division to symbolize and to be proud of. They can tell their sons, you can be anything you want it to be. And that was very important. March 21st, 1938, Charlie Burley would lose